You know, for as much flack as GTA 5 gets, and as much as people love to dogpile on its story, and admittedly, even I've been a little guilty of that myself, I think it still manages to reach a level of honesty that's kind of surprising, especially considering how goofy the overall story can get at times. I think this will always be considered the GTA where Rockstar took its satire and cranked it up to 11. Especially when compared to the stark contrast that 4 left, because everything in 5 seems louder in its presentation, it's more exaggerated and way more cynical than what came before. There's no denying that. But even then, I have to admit that to me, Michael specifically remains one of the most compelling characters in the entire franchise. There's just something about his overall ethos, the way he's written, and how the game never really shies away from his flaws. And there are a lot of flaws in him. So many, in fact, that I think there's a genuine argument to be made that Michael can be a little more than just a flawed protagonist, and by simply taking a look at how the events of the story are presented, there is a case to be made that he is actually the real villain of GTA 5. I think one of the reasons Michael feels so authentic, despite being a bit of an archetype, is that Rockstar understood exactly what kind of person he was supposed to represent. Somewhere around this point in time, when 5 came out, Dan Houser and his team of writers became, let's just say, mysteriously good at writing middle-aged men with teenage/young adult sons. I couldn't really tell you why. But I also think it's a bit funny how much Rockstar's character mirror in some way or another the stage of life Houser also kind of finds himself while writing them. Like, for instance, how in my last video I talked about an interview where Dan Houser explained that his experience living in New York and feeling like an outsider, being an immigrant, and struggling with depression helped shape Nico Bellic's character and overall philosophy behind writing him.
I was living in New York, I'd been living in New York for a few years, wasn't sure if I was happy, was going through a lot of personal dramas as usual, and that was why I was looking at some of GTA 4 again recently, and it's really dark, and I was like, oh, that's why. You know, I was single and miserable and I wasn't sure I wanted to stay in America. And life felt very unsure. And that kind of bled into it.
Now, of course, I don't like to make bold assumptions about what specific aspects inspire Michael's character. But at least when it comes to the way he was molded, he, as with other Rockstar protagonists, feels incredibly lifelike. Now, obviously, I think you can hear in my voice I don't particularly sound like a middle-aged guy with kids, but I think most of us at least know someone like Michael we can directly relate him to. Someone we've all met and probably even share a roof with him at some point in our lives. And if we look at the character Rockstar wrote just a few years earlier, we get John Marston. An absolutely brilliant character with so much depth and a history behind him that he inspired a prequel which, you could argue, ended up having an even stronger cast of characters. John and Michael are similar in that they're both fathers. They're both haunted by their past, but other than that, they couldn't be more different. John is a protective outlaw, the rugged badass trying to outrun the consequences of his old life while doing everything he can to make things right for his family. Michael, on the other hand, is a middle-aged lunatic who's obsessed with old movies, constantly lies to himself, and has somehow convinced himself that he's the victim of his own life choices. And I've always found it interesting to think of those two characters as opposite sides of the same coin. One almost feels like the idealized version of the kind of father someone would want to be, while the other feels like the version everyone around them might actually see. Maybe even the version their own kids will see. And whether that's intentional or not, I couldn't tell you. But it's a more than interesting dichotomy to me. And I also think this quote from Dan Houser gives us a pretty good idea of what Michael was meant to represent, at least in his eyes. He says, and I quote, "Michael, to me, is the person who is trying to ignore some rather large mistakes that they have made. The person who's trying to forget about certain practical but still selfish decisions that they took. He's a man, also obsessed by images and by appearances, and who, when the world doesn't live up to those images and appearances, doesn't know what to do. He just retreats into his head." He was the first character we came up with. He began as the idea of what happens to a regular GTA protagonist after they retire. Then you think, what will make him retire? He's a man with a big ego and plenty of good values and plenty of good bad values. And more telling, he said, a guy who's in his mid-40s and on the cusp of middle age who doesn't know what to do. Theoretically, he has won, but the spoils of victory are not necessarily what he imagined. For us, that was a very interesting character. All of this is to say that Michael definitely seems to have been conceptualized as someone the writers understood on an almost personal level, which in turn, I think it kind of worked perfectly for Michael to be the character we all gave the benefit of the doubt, because he brings just enough self-awareness to the table to be the more likable character. He is almost presented as the straight man of the group, because I can't really think of any character who is presented as more leveled and pragmatic than Michael. Except for Franklin, but even then, when paired together, there's a bit of a mentor and apprentice dynamic involved between them. I did find while replaying these missions that this moment specifically could be one of the few rare instances where Franklin calls out Michael to his face, and he basically nails it down completely, which I found really interesting.
So the plan was feeling sorry for your ass, right? I miss Lester saying that shit, but sure, let's feel sorry for Mike. Rich, white Michael, poor Michael, who robbed banks for 10 years, then got his slate wiped clean.
Yeah.
Poor Michaels, whose homies get into shit with the FIP out of the kindness of their own heart. Put their necks on the line. Man, where's my get out of jail free card, motherfucker?
I'm sorry, okay?
You know what, Mike? You a real easy dude to identify with, man. Poor me. Poor me. Man, pour me a drink, nigga.
Okay, I can see.
But again, this rarely ever happens. Most of the time spent with these characters, Michael's hypocrisy is never highlighted this much. He's the foil surrounded by people who are very clearly far more unhinged.
Jesus.
The hell are you doing? Are you taking a dump?
Ah, why do you care, huh?
The fuck is wrong with you?
Or just more inexperienced than he is.
What can I do for you?
Shit, I just came by to see if there's something I can help you with.
But once you start looking past all that, and actually follow the consequences of his decisions, a very different picture starts to emerge. In my last video, where I stated my concerns surrounding the overall tone of GTA 6, I touched on how GTA 5 developed its characters, and I said that for the most part, they could be summed up as archetypes. And specifically, I said this about Trevor. Franklin is the ambitious underdog trying to rise above his circumstances, and Trevor,
You are a hipster.
as Stephen Ogg himself describes him, is pretty much a caricature.
I'm Stephen Ogg. Trevor is a cartoon.
And even if that it slightly undersells the character, it's not entirely inaccurate. So I pretty much completely dismissed Trevor as a caricature, which, to be fair, I still think he kinda is.
It's cold up here. My cock's an ice pop. Ice cock. Pop cock. Fuck!
Looking back on it, I also think I somewhat disregarded some of the nuance that was actually there. I overlooked just how deeply he was affected by losing Michael and then having to come to terms with the fact that his best friend hadn't just survived, but he had actually betrayed him and their crew and lied to him for all those years. To be fair, the game also often tends to brush his emotions and setting them aside as a joke.
Yeah, bummer. But you know, he wasn't a good guy.
That dude was a killer, a thief, a liar, and irritable as shit.
Yeah, a liar. Above all else. Fucking liar.
Homie, you sound like some bitch he ain't called. Like, he lied to me.
I am some bitch he didn't call for 10 years.
Fuck, man, he fucked you.
So if you actually look past all of this, and you know, to be a little fair with Michael here, also the fact that the story explicitly states that he is literally a cannibal,
Human stew. That's my limit.
you start to realize there's a surprising coherent emotional core to Trevor's character.
Two dads. Great. Very San Andreas.
I got a fucking family.
Yeah, well, I got nothing. No one gives a fuck about me.
I do.
You sure about that?
He has an RIP Michael tattoo. That's how deeply Michael's friendship meant to him. And when you start looking at it through that lens, Michael's actions throughout the game become way more irredeemable.
I never gave it any thought.
He spends almost the entire story wanting Trevor gone, or just straight up dead.
Don't worry about Trevor. Trevor's dead. It's gotta be.
Simply because Trevor threatens the facade Michael has built around his new life. He's a loose end, a constant reminder of the life Michael tried to bury. And if you haven't played all the endings to this game, this is your first spoiler warning, so just skip ahead for like a full minute. Because I don't really know why you'd be watching this video if you haven't finished the story, but anyways. He ends up helping Franklin kill Trevor in one of the endings.
But Michael ain't the problem. T, I like you. You scare the shit out of me sometimes. But the way I see it, the way anyone normal would see it, man, you gonna get us all fucking killed.
You always like gasoline, Trevor!
Man, that was your best fucking friend!
I think one of the most telling scenes, and one that I also brought up in my last video, comes after the mission Fresh Meat. And it's in this scene where Michael explains to Franklin why he betrayed his old crew back in North Yankton. His justification is the rather simple explanation that we've seen in other media before, the whole "it was either him or them" spiel. And then he tells Franklin that one day, maybe he'll understand where that decision came from.
You took it? Man, you burned every motherfucker you've ever known.
It was that or die. Look, I know it sounds cold. I don't expect you to understand it. Not yet, but you will. When you got ties of your own. Look, you wake up one day and your legs, they just give. You just can't run anymore.
I think that line is incredibly important because it synthesizes the entire relationship between Michael and Franklin. And ultimately, it's also one of the reasons I think the Kill Michael ending is actually the one that's most thematically aligned with what these characters represent and with how I think we're supposed to really feel about them. I've mentioned this before, but that's also the reason why I prefer this ending, because despite being a very dark one, I still very much prefer it over Death Wish or Ending C, which we now know is officially the canon ending thanks to the updates of the online mode. Because the Kill Michael ending just feels like a proper bookend for these characters. For starters, it wraps around the whole aspect of no honor among thieves, and moreover, it reinforces the idea that a life of crime doesn't let you walk away without consequences. It's a dog-eat-dog world, and Franklin, by making the exact same choice Michael would have made, it's almost like he becomes Michael, as he uses the exact metaphor Michael used on him when talking to Lamar.
What up, this your boy LD. Leave one.
Hey, Lamar, it's me, homie. And I know I've been kind of caught up in shit, man, but shit been real crazy, homie. You know how it is. You just start running and shit, and all of a sudden your legs give and you just can't run no more. Anyway, man, just hit me, dog. We brothers, homie, all right? Peace.
Oh my god, guys. This is the moment where Franklin
Will eventually show up to defend his home.
But yeah, in all seriousness, it kind of serves to show that he completely inherits his worldview. And my main issue with the canon ending is that by comparing it to the other two, that one just feels a little devoid of stakes overall, if you know what I mean.
So now what?
Because even if it wraps up all the loose ends, it kind of makes you wonder, like, to what end? The whole story builds this idea that the government, Martin Madrazo, the Ballas, and whoever else has our protagonist in a chokehold, and that they're just simply left with no other choice, kind of forcing them into increasingly dangerous jobs and heists. And then, in the final mission, they just decide to kill everyone who's causing them problems. And I think it just leaves the player with no other feeling but to wonder, why wouldn't they just do that from the beginning and save themselves the trouble of carrying out like 70% of the missions in this game that are basically presented as being against their own will? And to be fair, I find it just a little bit funny in that regard. It's just very GTA 5-like in the sense that it doesn't make any fucking sense.
So all right. So let me get this straight then.
No. There is no getting it straight. That's the point. Now we're doing this!
Because it just feels like they were standing there spitballing like, who else deserves to die? Oh yeah, those Chinese guys that Trevor had some beef with back in the beginning of the story when he was still in Sandy Shores. And that they only pop up back again like 40 missions later to kidnap Michael, which, again, Trevor wasn't particularly bothered by that at that point either. So yeah, it just felt like they were making up who to kill as they went.
Well, who's the guy who set up Lamar?
Stretch, we want to throw him in?
Shit, Trevor will throw anyone in just to satisfy his bloodlust.
Whoa! Hey! It's called a fucking loose end, all right? And if we're gonna be men of peace and tranquility, we tie up loose ends.
Man, Stretch has been a liability.
But yeah, I digress. Going back to Michael, I think pretty much all of his characteristics combined make this character fall into the familiar archetype of the retired criminal turned family man, constantly caught between those two worlds. In that sense, he actually reminds me a little of someone like Tony Soprano. He struggles with both past and present demons, goes to therapy, deals with family drama, and all of this while at the same time trying to navigate the criminal world. But I think Michael is ultimately much more cynical in his approach. Because you know how people say that the most evil actions usually come from those who've convinced themselves that they're the good guys? I think that is also a pretty accurate way to describe Michael. Because like I've briefly mentioned in this video, he's almost always presented as the straight man in most of the scenes he has with other people. when he's paired with another character like, let's say, Trevor, who, despite being without any doubt the most unstable and unpredictable person in the room, it's almost like he isn't as dangerous as Michael can be, because it's almost like he wears his ugliness on his sleeve, and he rarely holds anything back.
You know, I'm sorry about everything that's happened, and I can't guarantee no harm's gonna come to you. I might have to chop you up into little pieces before spraying your pulp mess down the drain, but I really hope it doesn't come to that.
I appreciate your honesty. You are a good man. I can see that.
You need your eyes examined then.
By contrast, Michael presents himself as the reasonable one. He isn't never labeled as the craziest except when he's paired up with his kids, and he usually isn't even the most violent.
Are you some kind of pure morally justifiable asshole? What, because you're totally psychotic, somehow it's okay?
I'm honest, all right? You're the hypocrite.
Oh yeah, you're a fucking hero, so far above it all.
Oh yeah? Well, I'm not above ripping open your fucking chest to see what's replaced your heart.
Rip it open! See what's there, baby, because I'm ready.
Whenever he kills someone, it's almost framed as something he had to do. And even sometimes, the story allows it to be the case that somebody who got in his way just happens to die by happenstance.
Oh, stop! Look out!
The whole life he's built in Los Santos kind of works as a shield, and really a mask, if you will, because underneath it all, Michael is capable of some incredibly cruel things, and almost every major event that unfolds in GTA 5 can be traced back to him and those decisions.
Let me just ask you something, all right? Something I've been thinking about. Up in North Yankton, exactly who was buried in your place?
I never gave it any thought.
You know what I'm thinking?
I had no clue.
You treacherous piece of shit! You're fucking dead! You're fucking dead! Oh, fuck.
Hey, T! I'm gonna ask you one time, nicely.
Dude, I'll put you in the fucking ground with the rest of them. You always like gasoline, Trevor!
Get down there! Alright, everybody pays attention, no one gets hurt.
So let's talk about the events that led up to the story of GTA 5, the Great Betrayal.
T, you gotta get out of here!
I'm gonna leave you, Mikey!
Go!
And honestly, this could have been an entire video of its own, because I think this is one of the most misunderstood parts of the game's story. Most people remember that Michael betrayed Trevor, but very few actually stop to examine how it actually happened, why it happened, and more importantly, what the details of this story as they're presented actually say about Michael as a person.
Stick to the plan!
What?
Stick to the fucking plan! Come on!
But in order to really dissect what happened in the catalyst of this story, we have to start with the character of Dave Norton, because if there's one thing we can say for certain about Dave's existence in this story, is that Michael's betrayal wasn't some split-second decision he made out of desperation. This was something that had been planned, agreed upon, and possibly carefully maintained for some time at that point. Dave isn't really presented like the typical law enforcement character archetype who's there to bring down the criminal anti-hero, like the FBI agents in The Wolf of Wall Street, or the cops who eventually cut a deal with Henry Hill in Goodfellas, but he's very much presented as Michael's old pal, which I think is a rather interesting choice by the writers of this story. If you really look into it, you start to notice they're very much in this conspiracy together. Dave is the one who goes to the trouble of writing Trevor letters while pretending to be Brad in prison. He is, quite literally, just as much Michael's partner in crime as the other protagonists are throughout this story. And I think the game itself acknowledges that. One of the more interesting moments comes during Ending C, when the three of them are deciding who their loose ends are. Trevor suggests killing Dave, but Michael immediately shuts the idea down. He very astutely points out that keeping Dave alive gives them an inside man within law enforcement, and that he can act as someone who can keep them from being harassed by the cops and the FIB in the future.
Steve Haynes.
Dave Norton.
No, we need him alive.
Why?
So nobody fucks with us afterwards.
And you know, to be fair to Michael, he's more than likely right about this. After everything that happens in the Humane Labs heist and the whole standoff in the wrap-up mission, Steve Haynes is, in contrast to Dave, far more unpredictable and far more likely to turn on them. And by that point, Steve Haynes had actually turned into an antagonist, even if he very clearly wanted to back off before the rest of the FIB showed up in the standoff during the wrap-up mission. On the other hand, Dave has just as much to lose as Michael does. Their arrangement has implicated both of them, so he has real skin in the game.
We're in it.
Together.
So, if your problems are my problems, then I guess that means that my problems are sort of your problems.
Nope.
What if I lose my job? Someone comes into my office, starts reading my files. They'll see the things I did. I know a lot of stuff. I can cop a plea, get 5 years, but you...
Fuck you, you ungrateful prick. I made your career.
Well, then we better go about saving it together, because you and I both know we can't let it go to shit now.
But I don't think in the end was the sole reason Michael opposes killing him. I think they're genuinely friends, or at least acquaintances. There are plenty of little moments throughout the game that suggest exactly that. So Michael and Dave's partnership, as we see it in these instances, doesn't really paint the same picture Michael later tries to sell us. Because it doesn't look like this was just simply a case of the criminal being cornered and left with no other choice. If anything, it suggests that for Michael, this decision came down to something far more deliberate. But ultimately, Dave gets spared by the trio, not because he's reliable, but because he's Michael's partner. What's even more interesting about this detail is that we've actually seen Rockstar explore this exact dilemma in another story of theirs, in Red Dead Redemption 2. And another spoiler warning, it's eventually revealed what is basically hinted throughout the entire game, that some of the members of the Vanderlyn gang had been cooperating with the Pinkertons to bring the gang down from the inside. And along with the Pinkertons, these characters are all around the board considered and treated as the main villains on the last stretch of the story. The truth is, we don't actually get the full picture of Michael and Dave's relationship, and more importantly, how it began. And the story leaves a little room for us to just put the pieces together. We don't know who approached who, or exactly at what point on Michael's criminal career they started working together. What we do know is that nothing in the story really suggests the classic scenario of a criminal being pressured by law enforcement into informing on his crew. The game never presents him as someone who had no other choice. If anything, it suggests he and Dave had already reached an understanding long before North Yankton. But even then, Michael's own version of events is the only thing in the game that directly points out that him being pressured was the reason he took the deal, and he doesn't really make a good case for it. As Michael goes back to Ludendorff, in the mission Bury the Hatchet, he starts reminiscing or having what appear to be audible flashbacks of when he was explaining to Amanda the deal he made with Dave Norton. And this is what he said to her.
Listen, Amanda, we're going to move to Los Santos, start over. I made a deal. The slate will be totally wiped clean. Amanda, it was the only thing I could do. Either everyone dies or one guy gets out. I'm that guy. His name is Dave Norton, nice guy, realist. He gets the glory, I get out. It's not even a decision. Amanda, I don't have a choice. Do you want to die here where it's always snowing? Or do you want to go and live where it's always sunny? I did the deal, Amanda. It's over. Baby, we get out. Be happy, be normal.
I have always interpreted Michael's monologues, you know, the ones where he always tries to absolve himself of blame, a little differently. Because I think to me, what he's really saying is, if I didn't cut a deal, eventually one of them would have. With everything said in this video in mind, it reads so much more as a justification he tells himself. And I think it brings quite an interesting conundrum for us, the players, as quiet observants to this story. Why is it that Michael is not treated as a rat, the same way someone like Mike Cabell is?
You pick your side now because this is over. All them years, Dutch. For this snake. Be
And I think I know the answer. It's because GTA 5 is, at its core, Michael's story. He's the true protagonist. The three playable characters aren't really treated equally by the narrative, and no one is afforded more empathy than Michael DeSanta. The game constantly lets us see the world through his perspective. We know how Michael feels and thinks in every step of the way on this story, better than any of the other two protagonists. And that's in part because even in the gameplay aspect, he has way more features that explore this than any of the other characters. For starters, he's the only one that can go to the psychiatrist, similar to how we get some insight to Arthur's psyche in Red Dead 2 through the other characters asking how he's been.
You want to talk?
I think these features work, at least in part, to level down that narrative dissonance between the actions of the player and the way these characters actually perceive themselves. And it's like the game still makes an effort to remind us that these characters are not supposed to be this completely detached murdering spree lunatics. And I actually find it kind of funny when Arthur gets asked about why he kills people, because he talks about it almost like he's being possessed by some force outside of himself.
Been acting kind of crazy.
Mm-hmm. How so?
I've been killing. A lot. I mean, innocent folk. I don't know why.
Yeah, that's bad, Arthur. That's real bad.
And I think I noticed just a little bit of a humorous tone in him.
You're up, but I've always been crazy.
No, you haven't.
Maybe Ma could put a spell on me.
And maybe you're just being a fool.
I don't know what it is about it. I just really like those little quirks and winks in Rockstar's writing, and honestly that's something I hope GTA 6 brings back a little more of, because I'd much rather have that kind of understated humor than a lot of the more overt in-your-face comedy that GTA 5 sometimes leans just a little too much on.
Awesome! Let's rob somebody!
Do it, Dad!
Yeah! Do it! Do it!
Enough!
But yeah, I think all in all, that is also in part kind of the beauty of gaming, that different from a 2-hour movie or an 8-episode season of a TV show, they can pack so much content into this narrative that we can perfectly discern and understand his reasoning and even sympathize with his more heinous decisions. Which is kind of funny because before I'd actually taken some time to really think about this story on a deeper level. And you'd ask me which character out of the three do I think is the real main protagonist, I would have probably told you the main protagonist was Franklin. I mean, he's the up-and-comer, the underdog, the guy trying to escape his circumstances and build something better for himself. He works kind of like the audience, or should I say player's surrogate, the one who's constantly learning alongside the player and getting pulled into this larger new world of professional criminals. And most importantly, in the end, Franklin is the one who's ultimately left to make the final call. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized the story isn't really about Franklin's rise. It's about Michael's past catching up with him. Even for Franklin, characters like Lamar, Tanisha, and Tanya regularly call out Franklin's flaws. And honestly, that's something maybe I'd like to discuss in a future video someday. But before I get derailed again, the point is we pretty much get an insight into what Michael feels about the other characters all the time, but we rarely get the full scope of how on board the people orbiting him are with his decisions. Because aside from Dave Norton, which we've discussed already, there is also a lot of room for speculation when it comes to who else knew about Michael's betrayal, both before and after the North Yankton heist. We can take the character of Lester for example.
Man, I'm fucked, man. I don't know what the fuck to do right now.
All right. I say kill Michael, then kill Trevor.
Man, are you for real?
Now, we've never really learned how Lester knew Michael was alive after he contacted him, or how much he actually knew about Michael's arrangement with Dave once he ended up in Los Santos.
You'll need to pitch it to the guys.
Whoa, what? My rep don't count for nothing no more?
You're a dead man, Michael. I'll call you.
The game does suggest, though, at least in passing, that Lester wasn't involved in planning or executing the North Yankton score. The crew even jokes about how they didn't have to pay Lester his dreaded 20% cut, something they usually have to do after every successful heist to fence the stolen goods.
You'll get 20% of $200 million.
if I can get the funds diverted and you pull it off.
Still, come on, 20% of that's a lot of coin for sitting on your fat ass.
Lester's never fucked up the end game, not ever. He's the best there is.
Well, yeah, he better be. We pay him enough.
Well, I guess paying him 20% beats robbing the government and having to give it all back, huh?
That was an innocent mistake. Anyone could have made it.
Apart from Lester. This is what we pay him for. He'll get us paid, and he'll get us paid clean. Now is not the time to doubt him. Besides, where's he gonna run to?
And he can't even run.
Okay, just enough, okay? I get it.
Although, to be fair, that could simply be because they were stealing cash. And if you're an expert bank robber, you may know cash is probably the best target you can ask for. You don't have to fence it, melt it down, or find a buyer, as it is immediately usable.
Lester's offloading the gems. He knows a guy. Get us 50 cents on the dollar.
So this opens the door to make the case that maybe Lester wasn't involved because he simply wasn't needed.
You two, come with me. I'm gonna need some help getting the metal in storage for a few days before I can sell it.
Both of us?
Yes, both of you.
But just maybe could also be the case that he decided to deliberately keep his distance. Michael also tells Trevor that Lester was against taking the North Yankton score in the first place, which only makes the whole situation even murkier.
20% saved.
No, that's not how we work.
Well, you'll forgive me, but that's how we're gonna work this time, all right? We're doing it my way, because as I recall the last time when we did it your way, we all got shot at, you got buried, resurrected, turned into a twat, and Brad ended up in a fucking prison!
Yeah, and Lester told us not to do that job, but we did it anyway.
So I think the question of who knew about Michael's plan and who didn't is left pretty open to interpretation. The only people the story clearly states they weren't in on it, though, were Trevor and obviously Brad.
Someone must have fucking talked!
Overall, it leaves a sort of important aspect in the story in the air. Not to say every bit and piece of the puzzle needed to be resolved and spoon-fed to us, because that isn't really what a story like this demands. But I think what's more interesting isn't that the game refuses to answer these questions, but rather that it doesn't even feel like it needs to answer them in a way. Lester already knows Michael is alive, and the fact that one of the first things Lester says to Michael when they first meet after 9 years was that he never told anyone. It just kind of gives the impression that you're supposed to assume that he knew.
As for you, you gotta figure that I never told anyone. That instead of gently decomposing in North Yankton, you're angrily decomposing in Los Santos with a shrink and a wife who don't love you no more.
On that first meeting, Michael is oddly apologetic though. There does seem to be an attempt to make the character explaining himself to an old friend he left behind trope, and the mission we get immediately after seems to be something Michael does to get back in Lester's good graces.
Look, Lester, about what happened before.
I know you never mentioned my name. I know I'm not on any lists anywhere. I know you never betrayed me.
Lester seems to have always known Michael is alive. Trevor never questions how Lester knows. Michael never explains it, and the story just simply moves on from that fact. And like 90% of the times Trevor and Lester interact with each other, it's just once again Trevor grilling Lester on the 20% cut crap. And it's like, I think you two have more important things to discuss, especially after Bury the Hatchet, but yeah.
Lester Crest! Holding on and looking good, huh?
Do you have any idea what you did here?
Yeah? I pulled a score. What, are you jealous because you didn't get your 20%?
The bigger picture here is that however the timeline was on how Lester found out about Michael's scheme, it does imply that Michael's new life wasn't nearly as isolated as he sometimes makes it sound, just by the mere fact that there were people who knew exactly where he was all along. And I state this because there is also a pretty interesting argument to be made here that kinda shakes the entire foundation of how we perceive GTA 5's story, and that's Michael supposedly being in witness protection. So witness protection, as I think we all understand it, is kind of like a government play designed to hide and protect people who are, in most cases, testifying against other dangerous criminals. With the whole point being that it is to give a key witness a new identity and a life so that they can cooperate with law enforcement without having to be constantly looking over their shoulder. But if we look at Michael and Dave's arrangement and try to frame it in this lens, is let's just say a little unusual. If we look at this relationship from the perspective of this actually being a cop and his witness, or even his CI, it just doesn't really look convincing, which kind of makes me wonder why Trevor doesn't instigate this further. I mean, after figuring out Michael lied to him and all, he doesn't question the nature of his deal with the feds, nor with Dave Norton.
You, where did we meet?
Nowhere, pal.
Yeah, we did.
Hey, what are we doing here, huh?
This.
He just kind of tags along helping them in their schemes, which doesn't really make much sense. But I guess video games have to video games sometimes.
So let me get this straight then.
No, there is no getting it straight. That's the point.
I don't know. I reiterate this point because it's just a little frustrating how the game seemingly has to dumb Trevor down for the plot to work. Lack of intelligence was never really a defining characteristic of Trevor at any point in the story. And yet, at some point, the plot just needs him to stop questioning anyone or anything. In fact, I'd argue quite the opposite. Trevor is supposed to be chaotic, but there's usually some kind of logic or strategic thinking underneath his madness. So him not raising any of these pretty obvious questions, especially given that his entire worldview was turned upside down by the fact that Michael is alive, is, to say the least, pretty strange. But going back to Michael's supposed deal, if you've watched other crime dramas or really any story involving confidential informants and witness protection, that relationship usually, and I mean almost every time, is not something built on mutual trust. And more often than not, the informant is being pressured, manipulated, or outright threatened by law enforcement. The point is that this isn't at all the dynamic here.
The whole job. Everything about it. Anyone who knows your file, what is wrong with you?
Davey! Long time no see.
And what about Trevor? If that fruitcake realizes, finds out you're alive, you are D-O-N-E.
Don't worry about Trevor. Trevor's dead. It's gotta be.
Even if some of the comments they make about being friends are tongue-in-cheek, there's a genuine sense of mutual respect between them, I think. Over the years, they've developed something that, for all intents and purposes, resembles an actual friendship. If you finish the game by choosing ending C, there's a phone call between Michael and Dave that really helps distill the nature of their relationship and makes it pretty clear that, despite the sarcastic tone of this conversation, as with pretty much all of their interactions throughout the game, these two actually consider each other friends.
Michael!
Davey!
Are you behaving yourself?
Oh, but of course.
And how are the kids?
They're good. I actually mean that. Amanda, too. How's work?
Work, it's fine. Better than fine. It's good. Had a few lucky breaks. Look after yourself, Mike.
You too, Davey. You too.
But all of this is, I think, needless to say, because there's already more than enough evidence throughout the story of their acquaintanceship. Just the mere fact that, despite being in opposite sides of the law, Dave Norton apparently trusts Michael enough to help orchestrate an incredibly elaborate plan. Michael gets to fake his death and disappear, while Dave gets the career-defining bust of the infamous bank robber, Michael Townley.
Why did I move here? I guess it was the weather. Or the... I don't know, that thing. That magic.
When you really think about it, the whole witness protection story almost feels like it works backwards. Usually in crime stories, and I guess in real life too, it makes the most sense that when you have become too hot and have gained a substantial amount of notoriety as a criminal, you tend to want to relocate somewhere where you can't be easily identified. Such places tend to be a more low-key, smaller town with not that many people. So really when you think about it, if it was the other way around and Michael was a notorious bank robber from Los Santos and relocated to somewhere like North Yankton, it would have made much more sense.
You forget 1,000 things every day, pal. Make sure this is one of them.
I saw your face. I'll remember you.
You forget 1,000 things every day. How about you make sure this is one of them?
If you really had to place someone in witness protection, why would you want to relocate them to one of the biggest cities in the country? Why on earth would you let them live in a multi-million-dollar mansion, drive expensive cars, and maintain a lifestyle that practically invites attention? Whether from law enforcement, the IRS, or anyone else looking a little too closely? I think this arrangement doesn't work for the agent that organized it, nor for the criminal that gets benefited from this. Because if you take this and you compare it to something like what Ed does, the vacuum repairman from Breaking Bad, when Walt and Saul disappear, they're sent to quiet, forgettable places where they can blend into the background. They don't get to chase the California dream or reinvent themselves as Hollywood producers. That's not really how disappearing works. Aside from all this, there's the plan itself and how it went down. Once you start looking at how the North Yankton heist was actually supposed to play out, it becomes pretty obvious that from the very beginning, Trevor was the intended target. I think it becomes pretty clear that the plan wasn't just to fake Michael's death, but it was also done to eliminate Trevor in the process. And the only reason that didn't end up happening was because Brad's dumbass stepped in front of the bullet that was meant for Trevor.
The fucking bed! Someone must have fucking talked!
So all in all, this whole discussion of Michael not actually being in witness protection actually raises the question of, was Michael's decision really about self-preservation the way he always frames it?
It was the only thing I could do. Either everyone dies or one guy gets out. I'm that guy.
Or was it perhaps something a little closer to just selfish ambition? Was his criminal life actually closing in around him with nowhere left to turn? Or did he simply see an opportunity to wipe the slate clean, walk away from the consequences of his actions, and finally have the life he'd always wanted?
I'm rich. I'm miserable. I'm pretty average for this town, really.
Because all things considered, things worked out more than well for Michael. He got the mansion, the expensive cars, the family, the living room with the projector, and more importantly, a second chance under a new identity. He did more than just survive, as he tells Franklin. He prospered. And everything was going extremely well for Michael right up to the moment where Trevor shows up to his doorstep 9 years later.
Somebody say yoga?
Trevor?
Michael.
Hey. It's good to see you, man.
Yeah, I bet it is. Of course, I'm not the one that's been resurrected. Ain't this grand?
Yeah.
And I can't help but think that, once again, if you finish the story, gather all the details, and still determine ending C is the correct ending, you are providing Michael only a second ride into the sunset, because he already had his first back in 2004. But I want to circle back here for a second in that moment where Michael and Franklin really talk to each other for the first time. Because what I've been discussing kind of sets the whole dynamic of both characters. Michael is introduced as the end goal, the middle-aged guy who seemingly achieved everything.
I see you doing well for yourself.
Look, I'm retired.
Ain't you a bit young for the pipe, slippers, and staring at a fucking sunset?
He's retired, wealthy, living in a mansion in Rockford Hills, with everything Franklin thinks he wants. And Franklin goes to his house in the first place to meet him because he wants the ins on his success. He sees him as someone who's made it, someone who cracked the code. But the more you pull apart, the more ironic it becomes. Because Michael isn't a successful retired criminal. He's just a fucking rat. Everything he supposedly achieved right up to the point to where the main story begins is thanks to his connection with Dave Norton. Not something he really achieved on his own merit. This scene is all the more infuriating keeping this in mind. His pompous attitude, as if Franklin can learn a thing or two from him.
You know, I've been in this game for a lot of years, and I got out alive. That makes me the right age.
Just imagine if at the end of Red Dead 2, again, spoiler, Micah would have killed John Marston and company and kept the gold.
You shot me pretty good.
And in Red Dead 3, a Franklin-like figure came up to Micah and he will mentor him. It would suck. That story would be garbage. It would be pretty funny, admittedly, but garbage. Again, I seriously think Rockstar could have taken the time to add a few extra throwaway lines mentioning or at least suggesting he built something with the money he got from being a criminal. He could have been a retired producer or some shit, I don't know, and I'm not even joking. I think it would have worked pretty well. And just hear me out for a second here. It would have been in part with GTA 5's humor. With his fixation for films and filmmaking, it would have made sense for him. It would have given him the whole becoming a film producer arc a bit more cohesion with the main story, and more importantly, It would have built upon Michael's persona and what his character is supposed to represent. Because I'm not seeing the whole successful retired criminal here.
You kill people and then you sit in the sun and drink and feel guilty about it. That is not work.
I don't see you complaining on the way to the fucking bank.
Since he's arrived in Los Santos, he's done virtually nothing, and therefore, by default, the game tries to build his whole ethos around self-preservation. He constantly frames his choices as necessary, even when they primarily benefit only him. And on the other hand, we have Franklin, who is completely driven by ambition, by the desire to change his circumstances and build something better for himself. The difference is that Franklin is chasing a dream, while Michael is really only protecting a facade. And nowhere is that facade more carefully maintained than within his own family.
You know, this caring about two things at once. I mean, I want to be a good dad, love my family, you know, live the dream. But at the same time, I really want the other stuff too.
So I think it's worth taking a step back and talking about Michael's family for a moment. Partly as a refresher in case you forgot some minor aspects in this story, but mostly because I don't think you can really understand Michael without understanding the people closest to him. And the game does center a lot of Michael's character development around his family.
You are alone, you pathetic psychopath!
And if you take a closer look at them, they serve more than just background dressing for the story. His family says a lot about who Michael is and wants other people to perceive him as.
Kids, rooms. If you find dead bodies, cheap women, or Trevor Phillips, we're checking into the Rockford Hills Hotel.
And it also explains why the life he spent years trying to build is already falling apart by the time GTA 5's story begins. As a matter of fact, a pretty interesting thing to notice is that the whole story of GTA 5 couldn't really happen without Michael's family. And really more than being a generic family to give the protagonist some domestic conflict between missions, Michael's family is the catalyst for almost every major event that follows. Michael meets Franklin as he was repossessing Jimmy's SUV, and taking the mission marriage counseling for example, it's basically what sets off the story. Amanda cheats on Michael with the tennis coach,
What is going on?
She fucked a brick in my bed. You in?
and chases him with Franklin across Vinewood Hills.
Just don't kill him!
Michael loses his shit and proceeds to tear down the house the tennis coach was hiding at, only to realize it wasn't the tennis coach's house, but that it belonged to Martin Madrazo. That one impulsive decision forces Michael to come up with a scheme to produce millions of dollars he doesn't have, pushing him back into a life he supposedly left behind.
And I'm guessing here that the rebuild will be somewhere in the 2.5 million range.
Of course.
Great.
So what now?
Looks like I'm gonna have to postpone my retirement. Look, I only know one way to make money. I'm gonna have to give an old friend a call. Lester. I think he's in town somewhere.
To pay Martin Madrazo back, he has to rob Evangelico.
We're in and out in 90 seconds, guys.
The Evangelico robbery ends up on the news. Trevor recognizes Michael because of his infamous one-liner, realizes he's still alive, drives all the way to Los Santos,
Run, you little bastard! We're going to Los Santos!
and from that point onward, Michael's carefully crafted life starts unraveling almost overnight. So really when you think about it, almost every major conflict in GTA 5 can be traced back to that one family drama inside Michael's home. The government only gets involved because Michael goes back to robbing banks. Trevor only comes back because Michael goes back to robbing banks. Devin Weston only enters the picture because Michael goes back to robbing banks. And so on. I think you get my point. Practically every major player in the story is set in motion because Amanda slept with her tennis coach. But also Michael just couldn't keep his family together. I don't think that's just a convenient plot device. I think it's Rockstar making a point. Michael spends the entire game telling himself that everything he's done, every compromise, every betrayal, every person he's hurt was ultimately for his family. Yet the family he supposedly sacrificed everything to protect isn't a reward waiting for him at the end of the tunnel. It's the very thing that exposes how fragile the life he built actually is. So I guess a question I had was, how did Michael and Amanda ended up in this terrible marriage in the first place?
How about you suck my cock? Huh?
Michael met Amanda back in North Yankton while she was working as a stripper. And at this time, Michael was still running scores with Trevor and Brad. There's actually a pretty revealing bit of dialogue during Trevor and Wade's first drive to Los Santos where Trevor almost outright says that Amanda was the reason Michael started to go soft. He talks about the Michael he used to know compared to the guy who eventually settled down, started a family, and seemingly wanted out of the game.
Will you tell me the story about that boy, Trisha? He met a fat, silver-tongued troll under a bridge. That's cool. What was the troll's name? Michelle. Sometimes he'd go into town and rob the shops and inns and such. And he persuaded our hero that maybe he should rob people too. And you know what? Little Trisha did rob people, and little Trisha was good at it. Until the troll met another troll in a strip club, and they fell in lust, and he bought her a pair of fake troll tips. And then she pushed out a pair of little trolls, and the big bad troll under the bridge went soft.
In Trevor's eyes, Amanda changed him. She was the beginning of Michael wanting something bigger than the next core. A wife, kids, a nice house, and eventually a way out. And to be fair, Trevor wasn't entirely wrong. Amanda is really the first person who gives Michael something to lose. From that point on, almost every major decision Michael makes is justified through his family.
I got a fucking family.
Yeah, well, I got nothing.
His deal with Dave, faking his own death, leaving Trevor behind. Even years later, whenever Michael is forced to explain himself, he almost always falls back on the same excuse. I did it for my family. The problem is that by the time GTA 5 begins, that justification has completely fallen apart. His marriage is practically over, Jimmy barely respects him, Tracy hardly listens to him, Amanda openly cheats on him after years of Michael's own infidelity, and the household has evolved into two parents who can barely stand each other pretending they're still a family. So the question becomes, if everything Michael did was really for his family, then why is his family the one thing he failed at the most? Granted, I do think the game eventually answers that question, not by pretending Michael was right about them all along, but by showing that the problem was never really his family. At the beginning of the story, Michael blames them for almost everything. Amanda is unfaithful, Tracy is a cloud goblin, willing to do whatever it takes to be famous, and Jimmy is a lazy, directionless virgin, homophobic, racist loser with no ambitions and goals whatsoever that kind of perfectly embodies the persona of all of us, the players. But Michael looks at each member of his family like they're the whole reason he's miserable. He constantly criticizes them, berates them for not being better people, and acts as though he's the only sane person left in the house, all while refusing to acknowledge how much of that dysfunction stems from him. And it isn't until they all leave him completely that he's finally forced to confront the fact that they aren't the source of his unhappiness, but rather his dysfunctional family are just another casualty of it. And you can start seeing Michael having this realization after he is forced to flee Los Santos after falling out with Martin Madrazo again because, well, Trevor kinda kidnaps his wife. It is at this point in time in the story where the writers attempt to do something a little interesting, where Trevor becomes more than the raving lunatic type that our real main character finds unpredictable and kinda becomes Michael Foyles instead, in that he is perfectly capable of pointing out Michael's hypocrisy to his face. And for maybe the first time in this story, Michael doesn't really have a snarky comeback. He just accepts it.
I miss my family.
Oh, you're full of shit. All you ever did was ignore them, and now that they're gone, you miss them. Fucking incredible.
Thanks for sharing. Anybody else?
By the time the family reunites and returns to therapy, Michael seems to have accepted something he'd spent the entire game avoiding. He isn't standing above his family's flaws. He's the reason many of those flaws exist in the first place. I don't think what changes the most is his relationship with his family, but rather it's his relationship with himself, what makes most of his character arc. Once he starts finding purpose again, whether that's getting back into the movie business or finally having something meaningful to work towards, he stops using his family as the explanation for why he feels so empty. They're still dysfunctional, they're still messy, but Michael finally stops expecting them to fill a void that was never theirs to fill. And that's basically what finally pushes him to reunite his family towards the end of the game. All in all, the main argument with this whole Michael bad video is that yes, he probably could be considered the actual villain of the story, and that all of the events that unfold and basically every major conflict in this story can be traced back to his arguably downright evil decisions to screw people over. It seems like Rockstar, more than wanting to create a mustache-twirling antagonist hiding behind the mask of being a playable protagonist, they created someone whose entire worldview is built on a lot of contradictions. Michael constantly frames his biggest decision as acts of self-preservation, but almost every single one of those decisions also happens to benefit him the most. He betrays his crew because it was either them or me. He justifies everything he does through his family, while simultaneously becoming the biggest reason that family falls apart. He becomes Franklin's mentor, yet in many ways ends up passing down the very same philosophy that ruined his own life.
Just hit me, dog. We brothers, homie, alright? Peace.
Even his supposed witness protection story starts to unravel the moment you begin looking at it closely. None of these things individually make Michael uniquely evil. What makes him fascinating is that he has convinced himself that every compromise he has ever made was not only necessary but morally justified. I think it is worth pointing out that even in his moments of deepest reflection, he still, and I guess by extension, we still see his past actions as mere honest mistakes, as he calls them.
A few weeks ago, I was happily retired, sulking by my swimming pool. And my psychotic best friend shows up out of nowhere to torture me over mistakes I made, honest mistakes I made over a decade ago.
And I think that's why so many players instinctively side with Michael. The game is largely told through his perspective. We understand his frustrations, we hear his justifications, and because we're invited into this whole universe through his perspective, naturally we tend to start accepting these notions as our own. It's only when you begin stepping back and looking at the consequences of his actions rather than the explanations he gives for them that a very different picture starts to emerge. One where Michael isn't simply a man trying to survive, but someone who repeatedly chooses the path that preserves the life he's built, even when it comes at the expense of the people closest to him.
I got in a bit of an awkward situation.
You're telling me, bro. Yeah. One of those fake your own deaths to your best buddy, and then run off with the dough, and then live in a big mansion. Awkward situations.
It's one way of looking at it.
Yeah, do you have any other ways of looking at it? Because I am all out.
And this is why, despite having to subvert the audience to a little bit of a double standard to side with him, I think that's exactly why Michael is such a brilliant GTA protagonist. This is a character that perfectly embodies almost every idea GTA 5 is trying to satirize, to its own fault. Because I do think this game still lacks a little bit of emotional leveling in its overall presentation. I gotta be honest, I'm just trying to be consistent with my takes here, guys. But I do genuinely like the idea of Michael representing the American dream after the finish line, even if his way of achieving it wasn't entirely realistic. But I think the whole point was to present a character that basically has everything society tells you to want. Wealth, status, a beautiful house, a family, and financial freedom. And yet, none of it actually seems to fix just how unsatisfied he feels with his life. I think there's also a really interesting social critique wrapped in all of this. He spends the first half of the game convinced that his wife, his children, and the monotony of his life are what's making him miserable. He finds himself perpetually reminiscing about the thrill and excitement of his life as a career criminal. A life he, with the same breath, also explains why he was so eager to leave behind. He doesn't talk about those years with a lot of regret. He talks about them nostalgically, like he was an athlete reminiscing on his golden years. His therapist points this out.
By the time I was his age, I'd already been in prison twice. I robbed banks. I ran whores, I smuggled dope.
And you consider them achievements?
These were the opportunities I had. At least I took them.
And where did these opportunities get you, Michael?
They got me right fucking here. The end of the road. With a big house and a useless kid, and I'm stuck talking to you because no one else gives a shit. Oh, I'm living a dream, baby.
And I think that completely changes the way we should look at Michael. Crime was never simply a means to an end for him as he often justifies it. Nor was it the case that it was something he endured so that one day he could retire comfortably. Crime was the one thing that made him feel competent. It gave him purpose, identity, and a sense of importance that his new life never could. The irony is that the life he sacrificed everything to obtain leaves him feeling far more directionless than the one he traded to escape. Comparing it to its predecessor, GTA 4, I actually think that's one area where GTA 5 handles its narrative a bit better, because in reality, Niko Bellic is an amazing character. He's written as someone who desperately wants to leave violence behind. Throughout this story, he reflects on the horrors of war.
During the war, we did some bad things, and bad things happened to us. War is where the young and stupid are tricked by the old and bitter into killing each other. I was very young and very angry. Maybe that is no excuse.
The problem is that the gameplay constantly asks you to contradict those beliefs by mowing down hundreds of people between cutscenes. I guess you could argue that there's a greater ludonarrative dissonance that GTA 4 had to struggle with, having Niko Bellic as their main character. This whole conflict between narrative and gameplay can almost also be interpreted as a character struggle for Niko Bellic, almost in the same way that he criticizes violence. Yet his main driving force is tracking down the people who betrayed his military unit and enacting revenge on them. Niko Bellic's struggle is that he knows violence has destroyed him, yet he keeps falling back into it because it's the only thing he's good at. But looking at GTA 5, that is not really a present struggle with none of the main characters, I think. Because if we see Michael with the perspective that I've explored in this video, he doesn't really have that problem. If we recognize that he's just a walking contradiction, he's manipulative, deeply selfish, and yes, I do think he's ultimately the villain of GTA 5. But not really because he's the most violent person in the room. I mean, he can be, but most of the times, Trevor completely beats him in that regard. Michael is something much more dangerous. He's the kind of person who has become so good at justifying his own actions that he genuinely believes he's the hero of his own story. Michael doesn't have the ludonarrative dissonance that Niko has because Michael isn't trying to escape who he is, but rather he's trying to escape the consequences of what he's done. The gameplay doesn't undermine that characterization, it reinforces it. Every robbery, every murder, every time he finds himself drawn back to the criminal life, it isn't because the narrative is contradicting itself, but rather it's because it's exposing who Michael has really been all along.
I guess that's that then.
It is what it is.
Hey, it's certainly been an education.
Surviving is winning, Franklin. Everything else is bullshit. Fairy tales spun by people afraid to look life in the eye. Whatever it takes, kid. Survive.
Damn straight.
So all right. So let me get this straight then.
No, there is no getting it straight. That's the point. Now we're doing this.